Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 313. This program is dedicated on the happy occasion of the marriage of Gabriel and Chani this week, on the 26th of Sivan. Well, the whirlwind continues. The unrest, the rage, the pandemic, the ups and downs, and the effect that it's having on individuals and on our collective whole, which on an exponential level is very hard to predict. It's one thing when something affects one person, two people, a small community, but here it's literally global, national. And yet, here we are in another episode of Chassidus Applied, taking Torah and Chassidus, which is part of Torah, and applying it to our lives, an eternal blueprint and guide given to us by God to address precisely challenges like the ones we're facing now. That's one of the strengths, perhaps our greatest strength. It says, Hashem oiz la'amay yitin, Hashem yevorech esamay v'sholem. That God gives strength to His people. Oiz, strength, ein oiz ala Torah. Strength, but it's the word strength. And He blesses His people with peace. Strength here means fortitude, it means confidence, it means all that we need to stay afloat, to be able to navigate through perhaps uncertain and unknown waters, sometimes turbulent ones. So whatever it is that we're dealing with, whether it's due to the COVID-19 pandemic or the racial tensions upsetting and literally creating havoc in our cities, in our communities, we have something to rest upon. And not just to rest upon, but that gives us guidance. And it's more vital than ever when things are polarized, when you see so many different opinions. And it can be very confusing. Who is saying what? What is their intention? Is there another agenda? Is it political? I mean, just to sort through all the different viewpoints can be quite daunting. So we have what's called Torah Eir. Torah is called the Torah of light. What is it, light? When you're in a dark room, when you turn on the light doesn't change anything, but it illuminates and tells you what's what and where's where. So if you're riding on a road, and the life and the road of life is like life is like a road, a journey, and it's a dark road. All the paths, all the roads are filled with hostile forces. Dangerous forces, confusing, it's dark. What do you need? You need headlights. You need a light, like a lighthouse in the ocean, in the sea. We need lights that shine and illuminate for us, so we have the clarity to determine what's right, what's wrong, what's ambiguous, who's saying what. So the Torah rises above the fray and above the vicissitudes of the ups and downs and the twists and turns, and doesn't let us get trapped by people's opinions, by herd mentality, by this fear, that fear, pandering, and all that's going on today. So addressing the issues of our time, more than ever, when things are so confusing and so polarized, we need Torah and Chassidus more than ever. And I feel precisely that since this pandemic broke around Purim time, when it became a real issue in our minds, and now with the latest events in the last few weeks, with the racial tensions and unrest, that more than ever, the necessity for the program like this and other programs, in order to help clarify and help address the issues, be able to distinguish. We all know that certain things are criminal and absolutely unacceptable, but then the question is how to respond to it. What is the healthy response? What is short-term? What is long-term? How do we not get caught up in political and other agendas, including rage and anger, that can only cloud our judgment? As such, many questions have come in, many comments. I can only do a selection of them, but I've seen just from the diversity how this is, of course, on people's minds and hearts. Because we're all seeing our streets burn. We all see the challenges due to the unknown and the uncertainty, even though those cities are opening up from the lockdown and quarantine of the pandemic. Yet we see spikes. God should protect everyone, should eliminate and eradicate the virus, but it's not eradicated yet. So there's all these doubts and unknowns. And as we know, an unknown, a doubt, a suffix, in many ways is even worse than knowing that something is a negative. Because suffix, gematria amalek, is suffix, a doubt. Ein simcha katoras asfekis. If I knew that going this path is not the right path, it's clear that that's already a blessing. But if you don't know to go this way, to go that way, to stay home, to go to shul, to visit friends, to travel, that doubt is very debilitating. And that's why amalek is associated with doubt. So how do we get beyond suffix? We have to find emes. The emes is truth that gives us clarity. We may not know exactly what lies ahead on the road, but we sure know that if we go with that light, Torah ner mitzvah v'Torah the flame of a mitzvah and the light of Torah, we're going with a torch, with a light that can illuminate. So when we're faced with something, we know what to do with it. So the control is not necessarily the circumstances around us, but how we navigate. So with that, we are now in the week of Parshas Shelach, and this week is also, the end of the week, Shabbos will be Chof Ches Sivan, the day that Rebbe came to America in Tofshin Aleph, which means exactly 79 years ago. A year after the Frierdiker Rebbe came, a little more than a year. Frierdiker Rebbe came in Tofshin 80 years ago. Tofshin, now we're in Tofshin Pei. And the Rebbe came in Tofshin Aleph. So we'll address that, as is our custom, to always begin with something connected to the Parsha and to the time in which we are in. And we're going to continue addressing the current issues in light of Torah and Chassidus. And again, I thank you all for your questions and your comments. Before we get into things, let me just do a little housekeeping, some announcements. For those that are not familiar with this program, it's part of a series that's now going for 7 years. We're already in episode 313 every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. MyLife, Chassidus Applied. As you can imagine, we've covered quite a number of issues, and to the point that we actually created a special website called ChassidusApplied.com. ChassidusApplied.com, which has all the archives of previous programs. You can ask on a completely anonymous and confidential forum any question, any comment. We don't know who wrote it unless you share that information with us, so you can feel completely secure to know you can write any question, any comment, and it will be addressed. You'll also find there are many other resources, especially programs that we've been doing in the last few months addressing the crisis and the upheavals of our time. There's also, you'll find the essays, the beautiful essays written over the past years by people from all backgrounds applying Chassidus to a challenge in our contemporary times. With that, we are getting closer to announcing this year's winners. Just bear with us. Everything you read it, Shelach Aliyah, even though there's been a delay due to the whole corona situation, yet we will announce them. There will be winners. We will do it even better than we've ever done before. So just bear with us and apologize for any delays. You've done the writing. We will award you with the results, and we consider it valuable and precious. We truly recognize and value the time and investment and energy that you invested in this project. So, any other announcements? Yes, someone asked a question that last week I did a class called The Jewish Response to Racism. It's a very good program that addresses the entire picture. Here I'll be speaking about pieces of it, but there it's a comprehensive one, and was asked, I cannot find it because we have two sites. ChassidusApplied.com focuses primarily on MyLife, Chassidus Applied, in addition to Chassidic resources, Ayin Beis, Amagvav, other Maimorim, and as I said, the other items on the site. Our mother site, you can say, our main site, our flagship site is meaningfullife.com. That's where that class is. There we talk about, that focuses, that website, more on the universal elements for people of all backgrounds. This is a little more advanced. I use more Hebrew language and Chassidic language. It's still the same universal themes, but it's almost like a different brand, if you wish, a different type of audience, a little more advanced. So go to meaningfullife.com and just type in Jewish Response to Racism. There you'll also find an array of resources. We have a special Corona section there. We're also upgrading now our calendar and a schedule of programs and events, which is quite robust. We've created hundreds of them in the last few months. So check it out. It's for your use, and we'd always love to hear comments and feedback and critique and any comments, anything you'd like to share with us. Okay. So let me begin with Shelach and Chof Ches Sivan. We'll begin with Shelach and connect it. Shelach follows the Parsha Ba'alescha, which we read yesterday, and Shelach, another central theme, another Shabbos where the Rebbe would use the name of the Parsha and the story, the narrative, and applying it to our personal lives. In many ways, it's a continuation of Ba'alescha. If you recall, last week we spoke about Avodah B'koyach Atzmei. We raise the flames. We don't just kindle them, that they should rise on their own. Empowerment. Shlach lecha, it begins. God says to Moshe, you shall send unto you, shlach lecha, anoshim. Send scouts to scout out the land of Israel, to help prepare how to enter, how to conquer, how to properly enter into the promised land, as the Ramban explains. We all know, as Rashi says, the people he chose were the best of the best, the leaders of the tribes. And at that time, they were kosher, meaning they were pure intent, they were appropriate, they were righteous. But then things go wrong. They go off on their mission, sent by Moshe Rabbeinu, and they come back. 10 of the 12 tribes, 10 of the 12 scouts come back with a terrible report. We cannot conquer this land. And they start describing the power of the people there, the giants. Eretz Echeles Yeshveh, 3 words. A land that consumes its inhabitants. Kolov and Yeshua, the remaining 2, they protest and say, no, it's a beautiful land. Tov Ma'id Ma'id, very beautiful, good land. This is the land God promised. And we can conquer it. Of course, the 10 scouts had big impact on the people. They cried all night. So yet again, another defiance of God who took them out of Egypt. They traveled. We're going to the promised land, the land promised Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and now the Jews are crying. And God says, cry, you're crying? I'll give you something to cry about. It become a b'chia l'deiros. Because Tisha B'Av was when this happened, when they returned. And that night when the Jews cried, it became a day, very fateful day, sad day, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And as a result, there was a decree that all those, you don't want to go into the promised land, you get what you asked for, you won't go. You will all perish, you will all die in the wilderness. And it would only be Kolov and Yeshua that would enter. Even Moshe did not enter as their leader. Their children would enter, but not them. So this was a very serious event that has historical implications. What's the story? What's the story? The obvious question is this. As Rashi says, Shlach l'cha, as soon as Moshe heard, Shlach l'cha, you send it. L'daitecha, ani lo mitzavescha. I am not commanding you to do it. L'cha. You have to do this at your own volition. Right there, Moshe should have been suspicious. What's going on here? The whole Torah, God doesn't tell him l'cha. He commands me. He tells Moshe, do this, say this to the Jewish people. This is what I want from them. Here's suddenly a l'cha. Do it at your volition. Should have realized there's something here. And what happened? We see the result. So after the result, you would think, okay, it was a mistake. Shouldn't have sent scouts. No. We see later in Parsha Chukas, he sent scouts again. We see later Joshua, Yeshua, who was part of this and saw what had happened with his own eyes. When he comes into Israel, he sends scouts in the book of Yeshua. So we see, as we read in the Haftarah, we see that it's not the sending of the scouts. So what's going on here? And what was the mistake? What happened? They were the finest. What happened? What did they see? That suddenly God's promises, they saw all the miracles of coming out of Egypt, of the parting of the sea, Sinai, Matan Torah, everything that happened up till this point. Suddenly what happened? They don't trust in God's promise. So briefly, the answer is, it's a story of all our lives. They were living in a wilderness, protected by the clouds of glory, bread from heaven, miraculous water. They were living in a very comfortable spiritual environment. They were very spiritual people. That's precisely what the problem was when they saw this land. They said it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. We will not be able to maintain our spiritual integrity here because the land consumes its inhabitants. The answer that everyone who goes to work, everyone who goes into the marketplace, to the stock market, to the Wall Street of each generation, that's what they say when you start working, daigus aparnosa, the concerns of making a livelihood, the competition, the hostility, the corruption at times, all this consumes its inhabitants. People who start out idealistic and pure find it very difficult to resist the challenges of the workplace. Living here in the Midbar was like living in a yeshiva, God protecting them. So it was their greatness that was their undoing. And they forgot that the most important thing is not whether you like it or not. No one asked you. That was not the question that was asked you to go to Israel and come back with a conclusion. That was not the request. The command was go and scout out the land, how to conquer the land, not whether to conquer. And that was their fatal mistake. They turned the how into a whether. No one asked you whether. God sends a person to this world and the neshama doesn't want to go, but this is what God said. You come to this world. It's a difficult world, but there's a purpose. I'm giving you the strength to deal with this land that can't consume its inhabitants, that it shouldn't consume you. Yeshua and Kalev held on. Moshe prayed for him. Kalev went to the Maras Machpelah. Different explanations what gave them the strength. This was not just a small error. This was challenging and defying God's mission to life. It's like God sends you to this world and you say, no, I can't do it. There's no such thing as I can't. You only have to figure out how to do it. That's what you were sent and you were given the resources to figure that out. And that's precisely why Shelach L'cha. Because this is something Hashem, God, wants us to figure out through our own means. Moshe understood that. That's why he wasn't suspicious. He understood the point. After Baal Oischa, that the flame has to rise on its own. Empowerment, God is saying, I am telling you, but do this at your volition. I'm commanding you to do it at your own volition. It has to be you have to own it. And yes, is there a risk? Of course there's a risk, because we're dealing with Bali Bechira, people who have choice, and they can choose, and we see the Meraglim chose the wrong way. But that doesn't stop us from doing it again. That's how God sends us. He says, I'm sending you to this world. I'm giving you all this strength, but you have to figure it out. You can't say, no, I'm not going to figure it out. The scouts went to figure out the Das Tachten, using their resources and their faculties and their observation, how. The how must be done by us. So we don't decide whether we do it, but we have to decide, but we have to determine how, and that's a l'cha, l'daitacha. So it includes really the purpose of all of life. And it's a perfect lesson for our times, that when we're challenged, and we say, who needed this? Who wants this? Why is this happening? People writing to me, millions of people in this country losing jobs. Why do we need this? Why do we need this whole disruption? We don't know why, but we know one thing, that we have the strengths, and we were given the strengths, that even if it's an Eretz Echeles, even if it's a very powerful land, it will not consume us if you allow yourself to channel the strengths that you were given, the blessings we were given. Because for every challenge, we're given the strengths to deal with the challenge. So the lesson is very clear. No matter what it is, you may not see the light at the end of the tunnel. You may not see exactly, but you have the resources. It's a tremendous lesson in life where the Meraglim obviously violated that trust. They violated the trust given to them that they were meant to come back to tell us how. And they decided, no, we're going to tell you, no, you can't do it. That's not acceptable. There's no such thing as, no, you can't do it. You absolutely can. You have to figure out how. So that's our challenge today, how. How we should deal with the challenge. How to navigate. How to find strength. How to find deeper love and deeper connection and deeper unity. How to look at people through the eyes of God, the divine image. Ultimately, the real answer to racism, which we'll speak about soon. Now, Shelach takes on many manifestations, each in individual lives or collective lives. Throughout life, we will be many Shelachs. Many people, many times we will be sent somewhere. First, when the neshama comes down to this world, and then through our travels, whatever the travels may be. Even when you can't travel, that's also a Shelach. That's also part of the mission that God wants us to be on right now. The Rebbe, as son-in-law of the Frierdiker Rebbe at the time, had his journeys that began all the way in Nikolaev when he was born in 1902, and took him through many interesting twists and turns and very difficult ones as well. Tsarist Russia in the beginning, Russian Revolution, World War I. Ends up marrying the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushkin, Tofresh Pei Zayin, Tofresh Pei Tes, 1929, sees his father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, being arrested, being liberated. Yud Beis Tammuz. Then after marriage, they end up going to Berlin and Paris. The Nazis occupy and Europe and then France and so on. And finally, in 1941, miraculously, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin arrived to the shores of the United States. Many shlach, a shlach after a shlach. And you look at the stories, the ones we know, the Rebbe did exactly what we're speaking about. He understood these journeys as God leading him and the Rebbetzin on a path. And in each case, you have to navigate and do what you have to do. And there were very difficult times, you can imagine, under Nazi occupation in France and the other experiences they went through. Then finally in 1941, the Rebbe comes here, and this would become the permanent place, except for 1947, he goes back to Paris to welcome and bring his mother, Rebbetzin Chana, back to America. So for a few months. The Rebbe comes in 1941, and this begins a new stage of shlichus, as the Rebbe writes. The Frierdiker Rebbe appointed him to be the head of the Mejdus of Merkus L'Inyanei Chinuch and Kohos, Machne Yisrael. And the Rebbe faithfully does that, and 9 years later assumes leadership, 1950, Tofshin Yud, 70 years ago, and the journey just continues. So Shelach manifests itself in Chof Ches Nisan, Chof Ches Sivan, I should say. 28th of Sivan is a journey. It's about a journey and arriving at a stage, like the Rebbe explains, Chotzi Kadra Tachten, a lower hemisphere, where Matan Torah was not in a revealed way, as the Frierdiker Rebbe writes to the Rebbe, explaining what that means when the Alter Rebbe said Matan Torah did not happen in Chotzi Kadra Tachten, in a revealed way. So it's a darker place spiritually. And yet, as the Frierdiker Rebbe said, America is nistandish. The mission, the shlich is the shlach l'cha. This is also Eretz Echeles Yeshveh. You know what was said about America? It was the worst Eretz Echeles Yeshveh. You come to America, the golden Medina, the golden country, golden in Medina, money reigns. People threw their tefillin, Rachmana litzlan, the Yiddishkeit off the ship, the boat, as they were arriving to Ellis Island. Because America was freedom, but not Yiddishkeit. Frierdiker Rebbe came and said, no, we're going to change that. It's going to be here even stronger than it was back in the old home. So Eretz Echeles Yeshveh, unfortunately, took many people were taken by that, where the money, the capitalism, the power, the greed, everything that money represents, consumed its inhabitants, consumed the people, and that became more important than their spiritual integrity. But that was the purpose of coming to America, including Chof Ches Sivan. The Rebbe is coming to demonstrate that no, this land will not consume us. We will consume it. We will turn it into a means for spiritual growth, into a means for spreading Torah, Yiddishkeit, and Chassidus, into a means of building yeshivas and institutions that produce young men and women who will become in turn emissaries, ambassadors, proactive, shluchim, shlach, to continue spreading and disseminating the message of Torah mitzvahs until we bring Mashiach and the Geula, like the Rebbe told us, the Deir HaShvi, which began with Yud Shvat Tofshin Yud. So the lessons are very clear. Part of it now, we're faced with a new stage that we did not expect. Completely didn't expect. Complete surprise. The pandemic upon a pandemic. But we continue with the fortitude and the strength and knowing we have Torah Eir and we have the directives of the Rabbeim. And they told us, yes, it's a difficult land. It can have difficulties. There are many years where we had beautiful lives. We continue to have freedoms that are unprecedented in history. But now we have our challenges. But we're not daunted. We're not perturbed. We know we have the strength to deal with this, and we forge ahead. Vayuso, we continue the journey. God forbid ever looking back and saying, no, we can't do it. Leinuchal, like the Meraglim said, that we can't. It's too powerful for us. That's not the way we look at it. So there's the lesson, the general lesson. Now with that, let's address specifics about where we are right now in our situation. What is our attitude to racism? which we began discussing last week, and I'm going to continue because more questions have come in. Obviously, the topic on the headlines is that, and there are many different views on the matter, but we have a Torah that tells us. And it's surprising to me sometimes that just go back to the basics. The Torah preceded all this. The Torah addressed all kinds of challenges, including discrimination, including anti-Semitism, including hatred. So we have directives. And to put it in one sentence, the Rebbe, in hundreds of pages and hundreds of hours of talks, told us, especially in the 80s, the only antidote, the ultimate antidote, the proactive and preemptive antidote to all elements of violence, murder, including the murder of an innocent black man by a policeman. Every form of crime is prevented when you know that you're accountable to a God. And the Rebbe cried for hours. Establish a moment of silence in the schools. Teach our children there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears. How many hours did the Rebbe emphasize that? And it wasn't just talk. The Rebbe saw a problem, that the godlessness of society, with all its success, will fail when it doesn't have a godly higher purpose. The founding fathers recognized that. You don't see anywhere in the Constitution or in the Declaration of Independence focus on let's create big businesses. It was all about recognizing the divine creator that created all people equal, and everyone has equal rights, no matter who they are, no matter what they are. They may not have understood themselves what they wrote, but basically they were saying guaranteeing rights for every human being, because all are created equal. Essentially paraphrasing the words in the Bible and the Torah, every human being is created in the divine image, 7.5 billion and counting. No matter what color, no matter what race, no matter what religion, no matter what background. This is a divine element. That's what life is all about. You rarely hear this out there. I can't say I've listened to all the news reports, but you don't hear this message. You want to make a strong message of what's going on now? Why is nobody declaring that in the top headlines? That should be the thing that everyone should be yelling. Finding that dignity in all of us. Instead, it's turned into this polarized arguments of righting wrongs and so on. Yes, people have been wronged. But this should be a wake-up call of exactly that, the divine image. That's what we should be doing. Take all your passion and all your rage and all your outrage and channel it to a revolution once and for all, that God created us all and we're all in God's image, and that's what we need to teach our children. Now, of course, people say, listen, I haven't had God in my life for so long. And I remember this tragic joke was going around. It was very tragic. I don't want to even repeat it in a way, but I want to repeat it. Remember when there was the shooting in Newton and other schools, and people were saying, where's God? Where's God? How could innocent children? And the response was, God's response was, you threw me out of the schools. Exactly right. We're not talking about defying religion, the separation between church and state. We're talking about a basic principle that is in the Declaration of Independence, that this life and its sanctity, when you respect that, everything else follows. Does that mean everyone suddenly becomes perfect? But that's the standard. That's what we should be fighting for. You know, my platform here, I'm going to use it and to the fullest to be able to express that, and other platforms. All of us have to be saying this. It's the only way to counter. It's not just saying, look what's going on out there. People are completely gone crazy. They're intimidated, defunding the police, all other stuff like that. Political, pro-Trump, anti-Trump. Everyone senses it's clearly become politicized. The key message is one thing and one thing only, which is equal for all of us. This is not political. No matter who you are, whether you're a policeman or whether you're a white policeman or a black policeman, whether you're a white citizen or a black citizen, or Hispanic or any other color, shape, race, culture. I don't know how shape fits in there. That just came to me. You are created in the divine image, each one of us. This should be the headlines in every newspaper, in every media outlet. Anyone wanting to do something positive, to change the culture and make it better and say this is a wake-up call, that's what we should be saying. I can go on and on just on this topic, but I want to move this forward. But to me, it's so frustrating, especially on a program called Chassidus Applied, which is taking the Rebbe's teachings and Chassidus, what would the Rebbe say? The Rebbe said what he had to say. In the time of the Rebbe, he didn't see this in this extent. There was in the 60s, there were other times. Someone wrote to me, why are you talking about these topics? Does it belong to Chassidus Applied? You don't see it in Ayin Beis, Samach Vav. Well, you know something? First of all, if you read it properly, you will see it there. Because what's the whole purpose of Chassidus? What do you think the Maimorim are teaching us? That we're godly human beings and to live up to our godliness. Yes, they don't talk about racist riots in the streets or looting. Because that's the language of Chassidus and Torah. The Rebbe, look at the different statements he made. He even compared the slavery of the black slaves in America to the Jews' oppression, to one politician that came by, the Rebbe. One of the people came by. Meaning we have many lessons to teach the world. And what he told David Dinkins, which I used in Torah Meaning for Life in the chapter on love, to the point where he said, asked for peace between the two peoples after the riots in Crown Heights, the Jews and the blacks. The Rebbe said to the point that they realize it's not two people, it's one people under one government. Then later the Rebbe says, under one God. So the Rebbe spoke about it. And whatever he said then applies obviously now. It's the same, it's universal and timeless and eternal principles. So, in this context, here are some questions, some provocative questions. Once we've made this statement. How do you explain different examples of racism in the Torah? How can we reconcile the current climate which excoriates, which means it criticizes, racism with many examples of racism in the Torah? Such as people have dark skin as a punishment for Noach's son's Avedas, we must kill Amalek, slavery permitted, can't marry someone from Moav even if they convert, etc. Well, it's your interpretation that that's racism. Let me make that clear, and it's not. It cannot be. Because we always begin with a muskal rishon. That's called an axiom. Before you interpret any detail in Torah that may appear controversial or may appear discriminatory, you have to address the most fundamental thing of all. What is the axiom? The axiom is that God created the universe. That's undeniable. The next axiom is He created the human being in the divine image. The human being is Adam and Chava, which would become the progenitors, the ancestors of all human beings. There's no one that does not originate from Adam and Chava. Therefore, everybody is in the divine image. If you don't begin with that and you find some verse, like somebody opens up the Torah and mistakenly, or not mistakenly, opens up the Pasha Kisave, the Pasha of the Techacha, horrible curses, it sounds like, and says, wow, this is the Torah, who wants to read that? Or Pasha B'chukesei, or other statements. You don't begin with that, you have to begin from the beginning. And then you see context. What you see is, it's a Torah's chesed, because God is chesed. God created life from love. What meaning could there be to life if God created a world in order for it to destroy it, to punish it, or to have one person hurt another? Is that what God wanted? Of course not. So you have to begin with the axioms. The axioms is that everything is out of love. The human being is created in the divine image. We are divine entities, divine ambassadors in this world to create. Like he says, Puravu, Umilu Sa'aretz v'kivshua. Multiply and fill the world. And kivshua, conquer it. Conquer doesn't mean conquer it in a warrior-like way. It means sublimate it and turn it into a divine home. Gani, Basilegani, into a garden. These are the principles that we have to begin with. So then when you see a statement that says, one second, here's a statement that sounds like one person may be inferior. You say, how could that be? It goes against the fundamental principle that God created every human being in the divine image. There is no such thing as inferior. Is there such a thing as an inferior divine image? Is there such a thing as even splitting a divine image? So you need an explanation. You need theological explanation. So what's this distinction between one person and another? And what does it mean the Jewish people are the chosen people? I've talked about this. Are other people not chosen? What are they doing here? God chose them as well. So you have to interpret what you mean by it, but you can never defy and never forget the axioms, the muskalos rishenis, the first principles. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am your God, and I created you for a purpose. Yes, the Torah talks about criminals and what happens to a criminal, but that still doesn't take away from their divine image. We need discipline. Human beings have free will. They have two voices inside them, an animal soul, a divine soul and an animal soul. Actually, chapter 1 in Genesis, Bereshis, talks about the divine image. It's only in chapter 2 that you hear Yetzer Lev Adam Ram in the Urav, that a person also has a Netzer Hara, a negative, an evil inclination. And there's a battle, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya. So once you have that principle, then all your points have to be addressed. I wrote once a whole article about Amalek. How could that be? That God has to kill people that he created? So there has to be some explanation. Because the principle cannot be defied. The first principle cannot. I'm not going to go into each one of these. I'll address it more in the context of racism. Killing Amalek is not racist. If God said that there's a nation that became so contaminated, like the Nazis, that's not racism. That's basically God saying, and it's a one-time exception. So you'll say, one second, all racism says that. Yeah, but all racism is based on human discrimination. We're not talking about what God has in mind. You'll say, we're using God? No, if you believe in God, God is saying, here's a nation that's proven itself to be a danger to every Jew. Imagine like Hitler. You know this person is a Hitler. We're going to elaborate more on this hopefully in coming weeks. I just want to use the time well. So any one of the ideas in Torah that seem racist can never be racist because it's based, it would go against the fundamental principle that God created every human being in the divine image, including Amalek, for the record. Amalek also originates from the children of Avram and from Adam and Chava. Yes, also from the children of Noach. So you can't. But you could say a person, for example, becomes a murderer. Why does the Torah condone public capital punishment, even though it rarely happened? Because a person can sever their connection. Their divine image can become concealed, and they can become a danger to others. It's not a contradiction. It's actually because of their divine image that their soul still remains, but sometimes they have become a danger. It's not a contradiction at all. To say that a criminal is punished, and in some way retribution because of what he or she did, that doesn't mean the person is not created in the divine image as an equal. They chose to do something that has now become so horrendous that has to be addressed, especially if it's a danger to others. That's not a contradiction. And even when we have to punish them, we do it with crying inside our hearts. Even when the Egyptians, who were like Nazis and tortured the Jews for hundreds of years, or 86 years, however it's counted, when they were drowning in the Yam Suf, in the sea, and the angels began to sing praise, God says, my creatures are drowning and you're singing praise. So why did God drown them? Because they were criminals. They were worse than criminals. But they're still creatures of God, and we have to cry when that happens. When we see somebody do a crime, we cry that a divine image could have stooped to such a low state. That's very different than saying that person is inferior. They're not inferior. That's exactly why we cry, because they're accountable. They did not live up. They violated. They betrayed themselves. Adam betrayed himself and his destiny and God when he ate from the tree of knowledge together with Chava. Now, what about when you see things like slavery? Well, there's another discussion I had, and I'll give references because I don't have them right here, but you can easily find them on our site. Slavery in the Torah is not exactly what is called slavery, what we think is slavery. A master cannot do whatever he wants to a slave. No, it's not that simple. As a matter of fact, he has to treat the servant, is the better word I would use, than he has to treat him or her better than himself. And it's also under certain difficult circumstances. It's not just a natural thing that you enslave. A person who allows themselves to become a servant to another has betrayed themselves as well. It's more complicated than that. Slavery is not advocated in the Torah. Nowhere does it say, go acquire slaves. There are a situation where there are people who come because they need parnasa, or they owe money, or whatever it is. They say, I will repay it through my servant. The idea for Jews to come and just enslave others, it's completely not acceptable. It doesn't exist. Now you'll say, what about the stories when the Jews came into Canaan, into the Promised Land, and they conquered? So if you look at all the laws, you're going to find such benevolence and such compassion, completely consistent. Completely the Torah finding every possible way to discourage even the temptation. There was temptation. Obviously, you conquer land and their people. So the temptation to turn them into servants. And you see how the Torah dissuades and makes sure that the rules are so intense that nobody wants to have servants in their home. Now, if you're talking about a cleaning lady like we have today, or people who are paid and treated nicely for their services, if you don't discriminate against them, and you don't own them, and you definitely cannot hurt them, and so on and so forth. Just punish them because you feel that you own them. It's a divine image. It's always a divine image. As far as the punishment for Noach's sons, it's not so simple. First of all, many opinions, that was a punishment just for them. It not necessarily means that the blacks till this day are all a result of that punishment. That's number one. Even that punishment, it doesn't say it's explicit in the Torah. It's a Gemara, and you have to really analyze it well, what it means exactly. That he was struck in the skin, that's what it says in the Pasuk, Chum. Rashi says that Ne'elu Mimenu Kush. What does that mean exactly? But then you find in the Torah plenty of places and references where Kush is actually referred to something beautiful, as we'll soon discuss. To say that all black people on this earth are, God forbid, a result of a punishment, a curse, it's absolutely incorrect. Find a source for that. There's no source for such a thing. The question is what it meant when Noach punished his son Chum for what he did. He did a horrendous crime, remember. Whether he raped his father or he castrated him, but he definitely did something very, very criminal against his own father. And what that means, why would that be a curse for generations and generations? Why should great-grandchildren suffer from that? Secondly, you find blacks that are not necessarily result from descending from Chum. They could also be due to where they live in the world, the pigment of the skin. And where does it say someone has a pigment of a skin and therefore they're cursed? So it's not that black and white that you can just, no pun intended, that you can just make a statement and say that all blacks. It's a misnomer and it's a part of a stereotype. At the end of the day, every human being is created in the divine image. And that's what the Rebbe said, not two peoples, one people under one God. And no one has a right to enslave another, not a black to enslave a white and not a white to enslave a black. And for that matter, Hispanic, and for that matter, Asian or European or whatever descent or race a person comes from. What happened here in the United States, slavery, absolutely from a Torah point of view, was not just not condoned, was criminal. It was criminal. Even apartheid in South Africa, I'd say even. Apartheid, the Rebbe told rabbis and said, Torah can never condone such a thing. The problem there was it was advocated by the government itself. So what were the people supposed to do? Could they protest it? So they would protest the way they were able to. But never will you find an institutionalized Jewish approach that any race or any human being can be subjugated, can be enslaved, can be treated less equal than another human being. It goes against the principle of every human being created in the divine image. Simple as that. Now, can someone be a criminal? Yeah, but a criminal has nothing to do with color of your skin or race. It could be a white criminal, it could be a Jewish criminal, and then the Torah has guidelines, what you do when a person is a criminal. What does it have to do with the equality of their divine image? That's behavior, that's choice, accountability. And then there's a due process of how you deal with that. But just as a life sentence because a person is born of some color or another. And what happens if you're going to Africa where there the majority are blacks and a white person is subjugated and treated because they're a minority? Equal problem. It's all the same issue. That's what I said earlier. That's what we should be advocating. That's what we should be fighting for. Understanding this message. Again, criminal's a criminal. Criminal doesn't matter what you are and who you are. It's how you behaved. And on the other hand, if you're not, you are divinely, you're created by the divine in the divine image. Period. Nowhere will you find a statement that says otherwise. And if you do find something, because the principle of Torah is that God created the human race and every human being, you have to say you're not understanding, or we have to have an explanation for it. That would be an exception. It wouldn't be the principle. You always begin with, as I said, the axiom. Okay. Just to capture this, and I see time is flying here. Ooh. Oh, man alive. Just to capture this, Gemara in Tainus, 20b, Chav Beis. Rabbi Lozer, the son of Rashbi, of all people. He came from his teachers, and he was traveling toward a city. Migdal Gedoyer, it was called. He's on a donkey, traveling near the water. And there's a person there, walking by, a very uncomely, very ugly person. The person calls out to him to greet him. He doesn't respond. So he calls to him again. So Rabbi Lozer says to him, Kama mechuar, or says out loud, look how ugly this person is. And then he says to him, is everyone from your town as ugly as you are? And the man answers, Lech le'uman sha'asani. Go to the craftsman, the creator, my creator, who shaped me. And then Rabbi Lozer realized his mistake. And he asks for forgiveness. The man says, no, I won't forgive you until you go to the creator and ask him why he created me this way. They go back to town where Rabbi Lozer comes and all his students are there and they're respecting him. And the unbecoming man, the mechur man says, why are you respecting this man? They say, he's our teacher. He says, no, there should not be any other such teachers in this world. And they said, what happened? And they explained. So the people said, but he did many great things. He's a sage. Please forgive him. So he said, in your honor, I will forgive him. That's the Talmudic story. Rashi says that this man was actually Eliyahu HaNavi. God sent him to teach Rabbi Lozer a lesson because it says in the Gemara, Rabbi Lozer was very proud of his learning and a certain type of arrogance, subtle arrogance. It's a strange story. Why would Rabbi Lozer have this? But even so, a great man like Rabbi Lozer was humbled to realize because people can be deceived. So the commentaries explained that it didn't mean physical ugliness. He saw the ugliness, so he thought his personality is also was ugly, that he was a criminal. He didn't want to associate with him. Different explanations. But regardless, it wasn't wrong. It was wrong. And he forgot one lesson. Even a great man like Rabbi Lozer forgot that there's a God that created that person. Even in your eyes, he may not be becoming, but this is God who created him. So you have a tremendous lesson in life there. And it was meant to humble him. It's a lesson for all of us because we all can get trapped in stereotyping. We don't like how somebody looks. I'm not even talking about color now. Anything. I don't like that person. Whatever reason. We're taught there's a God that created each one of us. Each of us have our beauty. You don't like it? Doesn't speak to you? It's your problem. There's a divine image in each person. And that's the fundamental lesson. And so even Rabbi Lozer had to learn that lesson. And perhaps because he was so consumed with his learning, he lost a little sensitivity and humility. Because that's what it says. He was gas, it says, he was arrogant. And he was very proud of his successes. So he lost sight for a moment. And then he learned his lesson. But the man was saying, go to God. Don't ask my forgiveness. I'm not here to forgive you. This is not about a short term, oh, you hurt my feelings, forgive me. You made a fundamental mistake. Go to God and talk to him about it. And then when the people requested, so he did them an honor, which shows that he rose to the occasion, this man, and said, Rabbi Lozer was also created in the divine image. So he has a right to be forgiven. Like he says, I'm forgiving you, but make sure never ever to make this mistake again. Lesson that we can all learn from. So I'm not denying that human beings can stoop to discrimination. I mean, that's a given. We've seen that throughout history. The Jewish people have suffered from it, anti-Semitism, other forms of discrimination. Other races have, and blacks have, as many others have. Often the majority has discriminated against the minority. It's not uncommon. So we are now in a situation where we can all rise to the occasion and declare every one of us, every one of you, is created in that divine image. So now follow-up question. So why do we make a blessing, boruch meshaneh habriyos? The Gemara in Brochus, Nun Ches Amud Beis, and it's brought in the Rambam in Hilchos Brochus, Perek Yud, Halacha Yud Beis, Torah Shulchan Aruch Erech Chaim, Reish Chav Hei, Ches, Siman Reish Chav Hei, Sif Ches, Tes, talks about making a blessing on certain things, including when you see someone black, a kushi. But look at the Gemara. It also says if he's red, also if he's albino, very white, freckled, and a whole bunch of other list of things. And what is boruch meshaneh brios? Let's not use the way people mean it. What does it really mean? Blessed is God, a bracha, for creating diversity. Diverse creatures, that's what it means. It doesn't mean inferior creatures, it means diverse creatures. And the halachas are meant to be someone that you're not recognized. That's what all the commentaries explain. If you were a black living among blacks, could be the halacha would be that you make a meshaneh brios on a white. I haven't seen that before, so I make that disclaimer. But it's about meshaneh, that is different. And that's why there's a discussion, if it's something that's not different, which means you're accustomed to, would you make the blessing? It's about appreciating diversity among creation. And again, once you know the principle, that everyone's created in the divine image, then you understand this Gemara differently, this halacha differently. And on the contrary, you come to realize diversity is what we're blessing. God did create diverse human beings. So in answering the question, why do we say meshaneh brios on blacks, just like we do on those with Down syndrome and the dwarfs and so on, it seems very discriminatory. No, it's not discriminatory. It's diversity. And when you read it with clear lens, without any preconceived notions, without our own human biases and prejudices, it becomes very, very clear. As I said, lech le'uman sha'asani, even something that may appear to you as unbecoming, there's a God that created it in the divine image. Why did God make people so different? Why did God make people so? Why are some people black and other white? Why couldn't He make everyone the same? Wouldn't that make it easier to get along? Yes, it would make it easier to get along if you created only one person, so you can never have two opinions. Therefore, can be no arguments. Since there's no two, there's no diversity, there's no arguments, there's no divisiveness, and no battle, and no war. But that's not how God created the world. He created a world of many details that can appear as separate and different. And said, your mission is to make unity, create unity in a fragmented universe. On day one, the unity of God prevailed, says the Medrash. Yom Echad. Day two, it doesn't say ki toiv. Every day it says God saw what He created and it was good. Day two, you don't say good. Why? Because there wasn't revealed good, because there was diversity was created. Two, the number two. Separation of the higher and the lower, the higher heavens and the lower heavens, the higher waters and the lower waters. Day three is a unifying force. Tiferes comes and synchronizes and brings harmony into diversity. So day two is called the Yom of Nivra Machlekes. That day, the possibility for argument was created, because as soon as you have two. But day three, Bo HaKosav HaShlishi Umachriya Beineim. The third verse comes and reconciles between the Shnei Ksuvim HaMakhishims as the two verses that contradict each other. That's the purpose of life. Not to have a clone, not to have one color or one musical note. To have many and to create harmony within diversity. That's the Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, God desired to have a Dira B'Tachteinim. Tachteinim Lashon Rabim. Tachteinim means in the lowest worlds. But Tachtein Lashon Rabim, many different elements to it. And we come and gather them together toward one focused mission, to serve God. So the diversity of life, of all species, including the human, is exactly what the purpose was, in the language of Chassidus, to bring achdus within his chalkus. If you know this, in the way it works with the worlds, it goes that first there was just Eir Ein Sof. After the Tzimtzum, Eir Ein Sof was a Kav. Still Eiris without Kalim. Then came energies and one container, 10 energies in one container, Akudim. Akud B'Klei Echad. Think of like a conception of a new child, of a new birth. So what you have is one cell. Within that encompasses everything that will come. then as the energies diminish, the containers begin to emerge. So then comes the world of nikudim, points, 10 points, toihu. Here the energies are still intense, but you already have 10 containers, but they're fragile. So there's a shattering of them. Then comes vrudim, akudim, nikudim, vrudim, atzilus, tikkun. The tikkun of the shvira, the repair of the shattering of the containers in toyu. And now we have hiskalalus. Not just 10 distinct levels, but 10 interconnected levels. Harmony within diversity. And that's the purpose of existence. So the diversity could lead to divisiveness or it could lead to harmony and beauty. That's the reason and the purpose for it. So, as we continue with that, let's say this. Did Moshe Rabbeinu really marry a black woman? So, well, we read in yesterday's Parsha, Ba'alescha, Yud Beis Aleph, when Aaron and Miriam are speaking about Moshe Rabbeinu in an inappropriate way, and they say exactly that. They say, they spoke against Moshe regarding Isha HaKushis, the woman he had married. Isha Kushis. Literally means, Kush is a country called Ethiopia, but often is translated as black. And it repeats, for he had married a Kushite woman. So everyone asked the question, 1 second, his wife was Tzipora, she came from Midian. Midian is not Kush, Midian is a different country. So why is they call Isha Kushis? So there are different opinions. There's a medrash that says that before he met Tzipora, he did go to Kush, whole story, we married the queen, the princess of Kush. But most commentaries don't accept that. What does Rashi say? Rashi says that that she was actually strikingly beautiful. And we're not talking about Kush as the name of a person, we're talking about a character, the beautiful character. As a matter of fact, Rashi brings Kushis is the gematria of Yifas Toyar, Yifas Mara, beautiful. 736, the word Kushis and the word Yifas Mara are the same gematria. And Rashi explains beautiful both in appearance and in deeds. That's what we come away from this verse. I don't know if the origination of black is beautiful is coming from there, but it could be. Shcheira ani v'nova is the pasuk right in the beginning of Shir HaShirim. I am black and beautiful. However you explain it, this definitely goes against what we've learned, that some people interpret that Kushi is some type of inferior thing. On the contrary here, it's about beauty. Now there are other explanations, I'll just give you a few others, that the Midianites resembled the Kushites, that the Radak says it, Bechaye, Even Ezra, Chizkuni, that Tzipora was of darker skin. Let's see what other ways they explain it. Okay. The Talmud, as I said, explains it like a characterization in Moed Katan 16b. There's a characterization of distinctive good deeds, like good looks. And then, that's a summary of the explanation. So, how does it bear on our discussion? However you interpret Isha Kushis is definitely in a positive light. What they were speaking derogatory about Moshe was not that he married a Kushis, it was because he separated from her. And that's when Hashem comes to them and says, who are you speaking about here? Right before it says he's the humblest man. Speaking to a man that I speak directly with. The great Moshe Rabbeinu. And the subsequent punishment that they received for it, especially Miriam. So we see here it's not in any way derogatory, the Kushis part. In the contrary, that's a quality. It was that he separated. It was talking against Moshe, not against Tzipora, according to the interpretation that she's Isha Kushis. Okay, next question. Were the Yidden who left Mitzrayim black? Well, I looked up. I believe this is urban legend based on a rabid anti-Semite named Gamal Abdul Nasser. He was the second president of Egypt, the one that led the Arab attack during the Six-Day War on the Jews in Israel. And he was known to be an anti-Semite. And he made that statement, so I think it just became that. He said, what are you whites doing here in this land? He meant the Ashkenazic Jews in Israel. You were blacks. How did you become suddenly the whites are here? It was one of his anti-Semitic tirades. So I don't think there's any basis, but since you asked the question, that's what I was able to find. Maybe there's more on it, but that's what I was able to find. Okay. Wow. Let's cover, let me see, I'll try to cover now one or two more questions. Let's see what we can do here. Moving to a related topic, but on a different vein. With all the unrest, should we consider moving to Israel? This, quite a few people have written to me about this, that maybe the Jews in America should realize now, time to move to Israel. Well, this is a question not just in these times, in all times. And I come as a chassid of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who responded to many people who asked him that question over the years. So his attitude was very straightforward. If you have a responsible position in an institution or organization, a school, you're a shliach, you're a rabbi, and you're responsible to people, you can't just pick yourself up, even for your own comforts, to move to Israel. The people you're responsible for. America has a lot of Jews, and someone has to tend to them. If it's optional, meaning you can work wherever you are, in Israel would be just like here, so if the circumstances allow, it's definitely a consideration. The Rebbe himself sent his own shluchim to Israel. In Israel is the largest, a very large Chabad community. And besides the fact that many people in the time of the Friedrich Rebbe went, so it's not about not sending, it's a question really where your shlichus is, where your mission is. Regarding running to Israel due to fear, the Rebbe's approach was never out of fear. In Crown Heights, where there were the riots, and then there was the uprisings, and the social and the racial uprisings and unrest during the early 60s, and people ran from New York and from Cleveland and from Chicago and Philadelphia. The Rebbe was against it and remained and said it's a danger to run. There's halachas involved. That was the Rebbe's attitude when there was the South African unrest. That was the Rebbe's attitude with Israel. You can't give up land because if there's danger, you have to be strong. The halachas in Shin Chav Tes, in Hilchos Shabbos, what you have to do when you have enemies around us. So to run out of fear, so we have to look to our leaders for these things. Does it make sense? Some people said if all the Jews during Europe would have run to Israel before the Nazis came, it would have saved millions of Jews. That's possible, yes. But they didn't. Whether their leaders were right or wrong, did the leaders know? Did they hope for the best? So some are saying, be wise now. My response to that is we are not driven by fear. That's not what drives us. If we go to Eretz Yisrael, it's because it's for a positive, out of love, not out of fear. The love for the Holy Land, the love for the Promised Land, the love for the land that we pray toward thousands of years since the destruction of the temple, we pray toward this land. And we constantly ask in our prayers to return there. And even those in Eretz Yisrael say, Mipnei chatenu galinim artzenu, due to our sins we've been exiled. Not physically, they're there, but spiritually. So we are always aspiring to reach the Promised Land, and that's what we're waiting for. Each person's circumstances are different. So I'm not going to be able to give a blanket statement. If I myself have people, students of mine, people who've been influenced by me, who will live in Israel, and very happily so, and I encourage them, and I would say I'm not going to take credit, but I definitely was a factor in inspiring them to move there. So I'm not, if anyone, against that. But you have to also balance of where your shlichus is, where you're most important, where God wants you to be. Remember, there's a God here. It's not just about ourselves. You think every great leader among the Jewish people didn't want to go to Israel? Many of them tried to go. Ramban, Shalach, and others that went at the end of their lives. Why didn't they go earlier? Because they had a shlichus. And even though it was challenging and difficult, they have a shlichus. And that's what's most important. What does God want us to do? Not just what's comfortable or what makes sense or what would be good for others. It's what God wants us to do. That's what we're looking for. And if there are options, by all means, explore all the options and do what has to be done. We cannot forsake and not say, until the last Jew leaves this country, to say, you know what, we're all going to save our own skin, and other people cannot leave, and we just leave them alone. That's also not a responsible behavior. And we can elaborate more on that as well. Dear Rabbi J, please continue your work. I thank Hashem every day that we have your program. May Hashem bless the work of your hands. My question is, did the Rebbe ever address the future of our community here in America? Did he ever say anything in the Sichos, in his talks, of how we, as Chassidim, are to conduct ourselves in times of extreme turmoil, like we are now? Are the signs for us to go to Israel? Please forgive me if this has already been addressed or the Rebbe felt it was a non-issue. Please advise. Thank you. So I answered part of that. Let me just elaborate a bit more. The Rebbe's approach was that divine providence leads a human being. I mean, it's the Torah approach. And that divine providence means wherever you're led, that's your shlichus, that's your mission. Whether God sends your soul down to earth, like we said before, Shelach, that's your mission. You have to figure out how. You cannot challenge and say to God, I don't belong here. I don't want to be here. I want to leave. You could say, how am I going to fulfill my mission? So with that, we have all the strengths we need. So when there's what you call extreme turmoil, yes, how do we conduct ourselves? We look to the Torah, we look to Chassidus, we gather strength, we gather deeper faith and trust, and we increase our spreading of goodness and kindness and light and direction and guidance. In these days, we do it online, we do it through a phone call, we do it through different ways of unifying experiences. Look how innovative people have been. Pre-Shabbos programs, post-Shabbos programs, Zoom classes, just personal connections. I've seen things that I know are not going to... I was just speaking to a rabbi from Brazil. He told me all these programs are not going to go away when we go back to shul because it's really great, tremendous connections between us. And that's the way it should be. That's what we do. We do never resign ourselves. We never retreat. We see this as a challenge that we have to rise and become greater people and teach everyone else to become greater people. Whether to go to Israel, again, is a general question. We don't run. We never run out of fear anywhere. We fulfill our mission. Now, if a person feels threatened because of the different unrest, remember, Israel's also had challenges. You could suddenly say in Israel, things are getting hot. And the Rebbe told people Israel's the safest place, even when there were the Intifada and there were the uprising and the terrorist attacks. And people were in danger. It's the safest place. Because where God puts you, that's your shlichus. Obviously, you have to be prudent and protect yourself and your loved ones and do whatever is necessary to protect. But we always think positively, God is protecting, and that we do what we have to do, and God will do his part. And case by case, a person has to make a decision where they should live, just like whether they should live in the United States or should live in Europe or in Israel or in other places in the world. I think if you look at it objectively and get some counsel, independent, objective mashpia, a mentor that can help look at things, weigh the pros and cons of different situations, God will help you come to the right decision, each person and each family according to their situation. Okay. With that, even though there are many more questions and I would have loved to cover more, I think we covered quite extensively, and I'm sure there's going to be comments, and I welcome them, about all the topics we addressed today. So let me conclude with this. Being that we're going into Parsha Shelach, and we are in Chav Ches Nis Sivan, let us all embrace our Shelach L'cha, and the L'cha, bring our resources, our intelligence, the faculties that were given to us by God, to figure out how best to navigate and to fulfill our mission. The mission to transform the world into our promised land. To look for all the ways how we achieve that. How do you conquer this land? This land that has the potential to consume its inhabitants. How do we conquer it? How do we sublimate it? How do we transform it into a dira b'tachtenim, into a divine home, into a divine garden? Shem and God shall bless each one of us, each one of you, to be healthy and well, stay safe, and be a force of change, part of the solution, not, God forbid, part of the problem. Part of forging ahead, knowing, confident that we have all the strengths we need to navigate for ourselves, our families, our communities. And Hashem should finally see that we've done our part in the partnership, and should ultimately and finally bring the Geula Hamitis Vashlema, where we all enter into Eretz Yisrael, Shalayim Yirah Kodesh, and rebuild the third Beis Hamikdash in full glory, and we'll finally have the fusion of heaven and earth, the harmony within diversity. That was the purpose from the beginning of why this world was created. God bless you all. Thank you so much. We're here every Sunday, MyLife, Chassidus Applied, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone be blessed and be well.
This program is brought to you by MyLife, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.